Kendra Nolan pressed the phone tighter to her ear, frowning as the voice on the other end said, "Bring the car around and tell Marcus I'll need the jet ready by 7. She blinked, glancing at the unfamiliar number. I think you've got the wrong number." There was a pause. Then a deep, smooth laugh. "You're not Diane?" "Definitely not. But good luck catching the jet," she said, half laughing. "Wait," the man said. "What's your name?" Kendra hesitated. "Why?" "Because you sound like someone who doesn't answer calls from strangers, and I want to know the name of the woman who just derailed my afternoon." She laughed again, but this time there was curiosity flickering in her chest. Kendra Nolan." "Well, Kendra Nolan, I'm sorry for interrupting your day. I'm Yarden Zeller." She didn't recognize the name, and her silence must have made him laugh again. "You've never heard of me? Should I have?" "God, I needed that," he said, sounding amused. No, you shouldn't. But thanks for answering anyway." "I haven't heard a real voice all day." Kendra shook her head, still smiling. "I hope your assistant gets the message in time." "She will. But I'd rather talk to you for another minute. I'm not in the habit of chatting with strange men who accidentally dial me." "Maybe you should be," he said, voice low and teasing. And it was stupid, really. She should have hung up. But something about his voice, warm, confident, with just the right edge of charm, made her stay on the line for just one more minute. Then another. They talked for 7. And when she finally said goodbye, he said, "I'll call you again, Kendra Nolan. On purpose this time." She laughed, heart fluttering, and hung up. 3 days later, her phone rang again. Same number. "You again," she said, sitting on the edge of her tiny couch in her even tinier Chicago apartment. "You remembered me. Hard to forget someone who thinks I'm his assistant. I've upgraded your role. You're now the woman I can't stop thinking about." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Does that line work on many women? Only one so far. They talked for an hour that time. About everything and nothing. He never said what he did for work, just vaguely mentioned projects and travel. She told him about her art classes, her job at a bookstore, and how she was trying to make ends meet after quitting her office job 6 months ago. "I paint," she said, "even if I can't pay bills with it yet." "You will," he said without hesitation. "You just haven't met the right buyer." "Are you saying you're in the market?" "Maybe I am." Over the next week, he called again. And again. Always at night. Always just his voice, no video, no texting, nothing but his voice in her ear, and hers in his. She didn't ask for more, even though she wanted to. Maybe he had someone. Maybe he was just bored. Maybe this was just a game for him. But the way he listened to her talk about her dreams, the way he remembered her sister's birthday and asked how the party went, that didn't feel like a game. Then, 2 weeks after the first call, he said, "Kendra, I'm in Chicago tomorrow." She sat up straight. "You are? I have a meeting. But I'd rather see you. You don't even know what I look like. I know your voice. That's better." She hesitated. "You could be a serial killer. I could be. But I'm not. You sound very sure. I'm very rich and very bored. I don't have time for murder." She laughed. "That's not reassuring. Dinner. 1 hour. Public place. You can leave the second I creep you out." She hesitated again, then said, "Okay. Where?" "The Peninsula Hotel. 6 o'clock. I'll have a table in the restaurant. Just ask for Yarden." Kendra nearly turned around 3 times on her way there. Her fingers were shaking as she walked through the gold-trimmed doors of the hotel. She had worn her one decent black dress and borrowed heels from her roommate. The hostess smiled when she asked for Yarden. "He's already seated. Right this way." Kendra's heart pounded as she spotted him. He stood the moment he saw her. Tall, dark eyes, charcoal gray suit that looked more expensive than her rent. And he was gorgeous. Not just handsome, gorgeous in a way that made her knees scream. "You're real," she said before she could stop herself. "And you're beautiful." She sat across from him, blinking. "I didn't think. I mean, you didn't say." He smiled. "That I'm rich? That I own part of this hotel? That I fly private and buy companies for fun. She stared. You're joking. I'm really not. You told me you were bored. I am. And rich. Also true. She sipped her water. So, this is what you do. Call random women by mistake and take them to dinner. No, he said, leaning forward. This is what I do when I meet someone whose voice makes me forget I'm supposed to be at a board meeting. She looked down, trying not to smile. You're ridiculous. I'm serious. I've been around people who want things from me my whole life. You didn't even know who I was. I still don't really. I'm Yarden Zeller. I build companies. I invest. I make more money than I know what to do with. And I haven't been this interested in someone in years. She stared at him, heart pounding. I'm not saying this to scare you, he said. I just want to be honest. I called the wrong number, Kendra. But it felt like the right person picked up. She didn't know what to say. So she just smiled, eyes soft. Well, I'm glad I answered. His smile was wide, genuine. So am I. And just like that, the world tilted. Yarden's driver dropped her off outside her apartment just before midnight. He hadn't asked to come up and she hadn't offered. The night had been a blur of candlelight, violin music echoing softly through the restaurant, and the kind of conversation that made time fold in on itself. She'd barely made it up the stairs before her legs gave out, leaving her sitting on the floor of her studio apartment with her heels still on, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him watching her across the table, fingers resting lightly on his wine glass, mouth tilted into something that wasn't exactly a smile but something more focused, more present. Like he was memorizing her. The next morning, she found a cream-colored envelope slid under her door. Kendra, you said you've never been to the Art Institute. I find that unacceptable. Let me fix it. Why, below the scribbled note was a ticket. She turned it over in her hand, stunned. A private tour. Today. By the time she arrived, the museum was closed to the public. A woman in a navy blue dress greeted her by name and led her through the glass doors without question. It was surreal. Paintings she'd studied in books hung in front of her with no crowds, no noise. Just her footsteps echoing, and then you came. She turned. Yarden leaned against the doorway to the Impressionist gallery, a soft gray scarf tucked into his coat, his expression unreadable. You really rented the whole museum? I like hearing what people say when they're alone with beauty. She laughed under her breath. Do you always do things like this? I don't know. I've never met someone who talks about light like it's a living thing. She lowered her gaze. You remember that? I remember everything you say. They walked together, her voice hesitant at first, then freer as she spoke about brush strokes and white space. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explain. He just listened, hands behind his back like he was studying the art through her words. When they reached a small painting tucked in the corner of the gallery, she stopped. Her favorite. Why this one? He asked quietly. It's not trying to be perfect, she said. It's just honest. He glanced at it, then at her. You're not what I expected. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. It's not. They stood in silence, the air between them charged, different than it had been over the phone. She could feel him now, his presence, the quiet intensity he carried like another layer of clothing. Why me? She asked finally. You could be with anyone. He didn't answer right away. Then, because you don't need me. She frowned. What does that mean? You're not impressed by the car or the museum or the money. You didn't even blink when I told you who I was. You're not trying to get anything out of me. She hesitated. Is that what people usually do? He looked away. More than you'd think. Her heart twisted unexpectedly. That's a lonely way to live. He didn't deny it. They left the museum just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. A sleek black town car waited at the curb, the back door already open. I'll walk, she said, stepping back. Kendra, you don't have to take care of everything, she said. I'm okay, really. He studied her for a beat longer than necessary. Then he nodded slowly. Can I see you again? She nodded once. Yes. He didn't kiss her, didn't reach for her hand, just watched as she turned and disappeared into the city. Her footsteps swallowed by the noise of traffic and the wind off the lake. That night she painted. Not for a class, not for anyone else. just for herself. The canvas bloomed with reds and deep violets, colors she hadn't touched in months. The next morning, her roommate, Tasha, leaned against the kitchen counter with a raised eyebrow. "You've got paint in your hair and you're humming." "I'm allowed to hum." "Not before caffeine, you're not." Kendra poured coffee into a chipped mug. "What time is your shift?" "Not till 3. But you're not getting out of this." "Bill." "Who is he?" She hesitated. "Kendra. He's complicated." Tasha snorted. "You met someone on a dating app, didn't you?" "No. He called the wrong number." There was a pause. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Tasha blinked. "How does that even happen?" Kendra smiled. "I don't know, but I'm glad it did." Later that week, she came home to find a narrow box propped against her door. Inside was a paintbrush set, hand-carved, sable bristles, the kind professionals use. Tucked beneath them was a note. "For the hands that see what others miss." She held the note for a long time, heart kicking against her ribs. That weekend, he invited her to a rooftop concert. Not a stadium, not a crowd, a literal rooftop above a converted bank where a string quartet played under a canopy of fairy lights. The city stretched out in all directions, glittering. He didn't ask her to dress up. Didn't mention who else would be there. Just told her to bring a jacket because the wind would pick up after dark. She found him near the edge, watching the skyline like it held secrets only he could read. "You're late," he said without turning. "I was painting." His mouth curved slightly. "Then you're forgiven." They sat on a low velvet couch beneath a heat lamp, her knees tucked beneath her, his jacket draped over her shoulders when the wind did, in fact, pick up. She didn't ask how he put the night together. Didn't ask who the musicians were or how he got access to the roof. She didn't want to know. "What scares you?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the music. He didn't answer right away, forgetting what real life feels like. She watched him as the wind tugged at his hair and the city lights danced in his eyes. "Then don't forget," she said. He turned to her then, something unguarded in his expression. "Stay. I'm here." "No," he said. "I mean in this moment. Don't think about tomorrow. Don't worry about what this is or isn't. Just stay." She swallowed, pulse thudding. "Okay." And she did. Kendra had learned 2 things in the last month. 1. Yarden Zeller did absolutely nothing halfway. 2. Her heart had no idea how to protect itself from someone who looked at her like she was more fascinating than the skyline. But things were changing. It started with the gallery. She hadn't even mentioned her application again. The Chicago Emerging Artists Showcase only chose 20 painters a year, and she'd submitted her portfolio on a whim months ago. But that Monday, an envelope arrived addressed to her in looping handwriting. Inside was a formal invitation. Her name was printed beneath the words, "Featured Artist." She sat frozen on her bed, the sunlight catching the corner of the heavy cardstock. That night, Yarden picked her up in a car with leather seats that still smelled new. He glanced over as she climbed in, his brow lifting when he caught her expression. "What happened?" Her hands were still shaking. "I got into the showcase." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he leaned forward, pressed the intercom, and told the driver to cancel dinner. "I thought we were going to that French place." "We are. Just not yet." "Yarden, what are you doing?" "I need to see your work now." He didn't let her argue. 15 minutes later, they were in her apartment, the scent of turpentine and graphite hanging in the air. She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly self-conscious. But he walked in like it was a cathedral. She didn't say anything as he stepped past the shelf of half-finished canvases and pulled the cover away from the easel. His eyes didn't move quickly. They stayed locked on the painting with a stillness that made her breath catch. "This is what the world's been missing," he said finally. Her throat tightened. "You can't say things like that." "I can. And I will. I'm not a brand." "I know," he said, turning to look at her. "You're a revolution in paint and skin." She didn't know what to do with that. With him standing there in tailored wool and polished shoes, surrounded by the chaos of her life and calling it art. The showcase was in 2 weeks. She hadn't told anyone else. Not even Tasha. But Yarden? He started making calls. She caught him once, standing by her window with his phone pressed to his ear, saying things like, "Yes, but if it's between Nolan and Bellamy, you choose Nolan." Every time. Then, noticing her watching, he added, "Because she's not trying to impress anyone." That's the point. She didn't ask who he was talking to. She didn't want to know how far his influence stretched. But when her phone rang 2 days later and she was offered a full-feature wall at the exhibit, something no first-year artist got, she had a feeling. She confronted him at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and too loud jazz. "You made a call." He sipped his espresso. "I made several. I didn't ask you to." "I know. I didn't want you to." He set his cup down. "You're not mad because I interfered. You're mad because now you think your success isn't yours." She stared at him. "But it is," he said quietly. "I can get you a wall, Kendra. I can't make people stop and stare. I don't want to owe you. You don't. You've been paying me in minutes since the day you answered the phone." That silenced her. But it didn't settle the knot in her stomach. A few days later, she arrived at his penthouse for the first time. She hadn't planned to. But he'd sent a car, and after a long day trying to finish the final pieces for the show, she gave in and said yes. The elevator opened directly into the living room. She stepped out and froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A skyline so close she could reach out and touch it. Art on the walls, not prints, but originals. She recognized a Rothko. A real one. "Come in," he called from the kitchen. She followed the scent of roasted garlic and fresh basil. He was barefoot, sleeves rolled, stirring something in a copper pot. "You cook?" she asked, stunned. "I do. Poorly. But tonight I bribed someone to teach me. For me. For us." They ate by the windows, the city glowing beneath them. He poured her wine, but didn't push when she declined. Instead, he asked about her childhood. Her parents. Her earliest memory of painting. She told him about the time she'd drawn a hummingbird on the back of a church bulletin at age 7, and the pastor had held it up to the congregation and said, "Now this is God's work." "And I believed him for years," she said, laughing softly. "You should still believe him." She shook her head. "You keep saying these things like they're facts." "They are. You just haven't caught up yet." After dinner, he led her to a small room off the hallway. She'd expected an office. Maybe a media room. Instead, a blank canvas. A new easel. Fresh tubes of paint, still unopened. "What is this?" "Your space. For when you're here." She stared at the setup. Her fingers itched to reach for the brushes. "I can't accept this." "You already have." He stepped closer. "You don't have to use it. But it's here. For the nights you don't want to go home. For the mornings you can't stop thinking about a color. For the moments between." She felt something shift inside her. A door opening. Then he said something that made her breath catch. "My mother painted." She turned to look at him. "She stopped when my father left." Said it reminded her of dreams she couldn't afford anymore. Kendra held still. "I hated watching her fold into herself like that," he said. "I promised myself I'd never love someone who needed saving." She swallowed. "Do you think I do?" He met her gaze. "No. That's why I think I'm in trouble." The air between them pulsed with something new. Something that hadn't been there before. She could feel the distance between them shrinking. Not just physically. Not just emotionally. But something deeper. A quiet unraveling. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening. "I have to take this." She nodded, stepping back. He left the room, but not before brushing her hand with his. The contact was brief. Electric. She stared at the canvases long after he was gone, wondering what it meant that the man who had everything was still haunted by the silence of someone else's brush, and what it meant that she wanted to fill that silence for him. The night of the showcase buzzed with energy. Kendra stood in the back hallway of the gallery, behind a curtain drawn just enough to let her peek at the crowd gathering beyond. Men and women in sleek black suits and shimmering gowns moved between walls of vivid canvases, glasses of champagne catching the light. Her name was printed on a silver placard beneath each of her paintings. She pressed her hands together, trying to quiet the tremble in her chest. "You ready?" asked a voice behind her. She turned to see Tasha, dressed in slate blue, her curls pinned back with silver combs. She looked proud and slightly out of breath. "I can't feel my legs," Kendra whispered. "That's just adrenaline. You'll feel them again when you're famous." Kendra laughed under her breath, but her attention drifted back to the crowd. "He's not here. He'll come." Tasha's voice softened. "He's never missed anything this important." She nodded, but something uneasy stirred beneath her ribs. Yarden had been distant all week, present but distracted. She'd noticed the shift in his voice, the way he'd lingered in doorways like he was weighing something he hadn't yet decided to tell her. A soft chime rang through the gallery speakers. The curator's voice followed, announcing the featured artists and inviting guests to begin the tour. Kendra stepped out from behind the curtain. Her section had been placed near the center of the gallery beneath a skylight that poured warm light across her pieces. Guests moved slowly through her space, pausing at each canvas, heads tilting, brows lifting in appreciation. She caught murmurs of praise, the occasional gasp of recognition. But she didn't hear his voice. She moved through the crowd in a daze, answering questions, accepting compliments, her eyes scanning the crowd over and over. It wasn't until she reached the far end of the gallery that she saw him. He stood with his back to the room, facing a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the city. Alone. Still. She stepped up beside him. "I thought maybe you weren't coming." "I almost didn't." She looked up at him. "Why?" He turned to her, the light from the gallery catching the hard line of his jaw. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. Her stomach dropped. "I've been offered a position overseas. It's not just a job, it's a full buyout of one of my companies. It would put me in London for the next 2 years. Maybe longer." She blinked. "When?" "They want an answer by tomorrow." Kendra stepped back slightly. "You weren't going to tell me?" "I didn't know how." He ran a hand through his hair. "This thing between us, it caught me off guard. I didn't expect to want someone in my life in a way that made leaving feel like losing." She folded her arms tightly. "You should have told me the moment it came up. I was scared you'd pull away." She met his gaze. "And now I realize I already messed this up by not trusting you." He looked around the room, then back at her, his expression shifting. "I didn't make any calls about this gallery, Kendra. Not after you told me not to. Everything here? It's yours. Every buyer who asked to meet you tonight? They came for your work, not because of me." Her breath caught. "I wanted to help, but I knew if I touched it, I'd ruin it. So I stepped back." She stared at him, eyes burning. "I've been offered a future I've worked toward for a decade," he continued. "But it doesn't feel right anymore. Not without you in it." A slow hush settled around them. The noise of the gallery faded. "I don't want you to give up your life for me," she said. "I'm not." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is my answer. I haven't sent it yet." He held it out to her. She took it with trembling fingers and opened it. "I turned them down," he said quietly. "But it's not official until I sign." She looked up at him. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I want you to know that you're not something I'm fitting in around my life. You are my life now." Tears blurred her vision. "That's not a decision I can make for you." "Yes, it is. Because if I stay, I want to know I'm not staying for someone who's already halfway out the door." She folded the paper and pressed it back into his hand. "Then sign it. Because I'm not going anywhere." He stared at her for a beat, then pulled a pen from his inside pocket and signed in one smooth motion. A cheer burst out behind them. Kendra turned to see Tasha grinning beside the curator, who was clapping with a glass of champagne in hand. "Apparently your biggest painting just sold," she called out. "For a ridiculous amount." Kendra's jaw dropped. "What?" Yarden leaned in. "You might want to check the buyer's name." She narrowed her eyes. "What did you do?" "I told myself I wouldn't interfere. But I couldn't help it." She walked toward the curator and asked to see the form. She stared at the name. "Who's Elijah Zeller?" she asked, walking back toward him. "My younger brother. He's always had better taste than me." "You had him buy my painting?" "I asked him to come see it. He offered on the spot." "I didn't even mention the price." Kendra shook her head. You really can't help yourself. I'm trying. But I'm also trying to build a life with you. And part of that is making sure you get everything you deserve. She stepped into his arms without thinking. And for the first time in weeks, everything inside her went still. Later that night, they returned to her apartment. Not his penthouse. Not a rooftop with violins. Just the place where it all began. He poured her tea while she peeled off her shoes and sat cross-legged on the worn couch, her dress bunched around her knees. He joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You know, she said, I still can't believe I answered that call. He kissed her temple. Best wrong number I've ever dialed. She laughed. So what now? Now, he said, pulling her closer. We figure out how to build something that's ours. Not mine. Not yours. Ours. She looked up at him, her eyes full. You sure you want that? I want messy mornings and late-night painting sessions and a fridge full of things I can't pronounce because you're trying a new recipe. I want the walls covered in canvases and your music playing too loud. I want you. She pressed her forehead to his. Then you've got me. Outside, the city moved on. But inside that small apartment, where a call once rang out to the wrong person and found the right one instead, something new began. Not perfect. Not easy, but real. And the sky above Lake Michigan was a wash of gold and rose, the kind of evening that made the city feel hushed and reverent. Kendra stood at the edge of the dock behind the lakeside cottage, the cool wood beneath her bare feet grounding her as wind brushed strands of hair across her cheek. She held a palette in one hand, brush in the other, but her eyes weren't on the canvas propped before her. They were on the man walking toward her with 2 mugs in his hands and a wool blanket slung over one shoulder. You haven't painted a single stroke, Yarden said, offering her a mug. I'm thinking. That's what you always say when you're caught daydreaming. She took the tea, fingers brushing his. Maybe I like the view too much to change it. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders without asking and stood beside her. We could stay longer. A week. A month. You'd lose your mind after 4 days, she said. You need buildings and boardrooms and high-stake negotiations. He shook his head. I need quiet. I just didn't realize it until I met you. Kendra looked out at the water. You've changed. So have you. She didn't argue. Life in the city hadn't stopped. Her pieces from the showcase had sold out within 72 hours. 3 galleries had reached out and 1 had flown her to New York for a weekend. She'd said no to all of them. Not because she didn't want more, but because for the first time she wanted to choose her next step without fear. Yarden had stood beside her through it all, not guiding, not pushing, just there. Present and constant. I got an email today, she said, curling her fingers around the mug. The Institute wants to feature me in their winter collection. Permanent rotation. His gaze didn't leave her. That's everything you wanted. Not everything. Tell me what's missing, he said, voice low. She turned to face him fully, the wind tugging at her blanket. I want to build something with you. Not just love. A life. Something that doesn't disappear when the gallery lights go out or the next offer comes in. He reached for her hand. I talked to Elijah. She blinked. Your brother. He's taking over the London deal. I'm staying here permanently. Her chest tightened. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She stepped closer, her free hand resting against his chest. You're giving up billions. I'm gaining something better. A future I never thought I deserved. She tipped her head. And what does that future look like? He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Kendra's breath caught. He didn't go down on one knee. He didn't make a speech. He just opened the box between them, revealing a ring with a thin gold band and a single, oval-cut diamond that caught the light like it held the whole sky inside it. I bought this the day after the showcase, he said. But I waited because I wanted you to choose everything else first. Now I want you to choose this. Choose us. Kendra stared at the ring, then at him. I don't care about jewelry. He smiled, soft and steady. I know. She closed the box gently, then took his hand and placed it over her heart. I say yes to you. And to this. Not because of what you gave up, but because of what you've become. He leaned down and kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that made the air around them disappear. They didn't need music. The lake lapped quietly at the shoreline, and the sky dimmed to indigo as stars began to blink into view. Later that night, they lay tangled on the couch inside the cottage, the fire crackling low in the hearth, her head on his chest, his fingers drawing slow circles along her spine. You remember when you said you didn't want to be someone who needed saving? She whispered. I remember. You never saved me, she said softly. You just gave me space to fly. He kissed her hair. And you reminded me what it means to land. They didn't talk about the city that night, or the next show, or the wedding. They just stayed there, wrapped in firelight and quiet, memorizing the feeling of being entirely seen. Months passed. Spring bloomed across Chicago in bursts of green and white. The gallery unveiled Kendra's full collection in a solo exhibit that drew crowds for 6 straight weeks. Her work was raw and vivid, full of emotion. Critics called her a voice that paints silence into color. Yarden watched from the back, never stepping into her spotlight, but always within reach. They got married in late summer on the rooftop where he'd first brought her to listen to a string quartet under fairy lights. Only 30 guests. No press. No spectacle. Tasha officiated. Yarden wore a navy suit and no tie. Kendra walked barefoot down the aisle in a dress made of silk and stitched with tiny embroidered constellations. When they kissed, the sky cracked open with thunder and a gust of wind lifted her veil in the perfect, cinematic swirl. He laughed into her mouth and she whispered, You're mine now. I always was, he murmured. They moved into a converted brownstone with tall windows and a studio that smelled like paint and old records. He worked from home more often than not, and she sold pieces only when she wanted to, not when she needed to. Every Friday he brought her flowers wrapped in brown paper. Not because it was a tradition, but because she once told him that fresh petals reminded her of second chances. And every Sunday, they sat together in silence, watching the light change across the floorboards, saying nothing but feeling everything. They didn't build a perfect life. They built a real one, and it was beautiful.